Good afternoon, everybody. I'm JP Tasker from CBC News, and I'll be today's moderator. We have Ministers Lametti, Mendicino, LeBlanc, and Bennett, and MPs Anand Sangri and Sarai here to make an announcement about bail reform. So I'll hand it over to you, Ministers, whoever wants to go first. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, JP. Bonjour. Hello. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We have a larger than usual team with you today, so I'll start by introducing my colleagues. To my immediate right, Minister of Intergovernmental Relations, Dominic LeBlanc. To my immediate left, the Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendicino. One further to the left, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health, Carolyn Bennett. Next to my right, my extremely talented Parliamentary Secretary, Gary Ananda Sangri. And finally, to my far right, Chair of the Justice Committee, MP Randy Sarai. Si nous sommes si nombreux à être présents aujourd'hui, c'est pour une bonne raison. Nous avons tous un rôle à jouer pour que les Canadiens se sentent en sécurité partout au pays. Et nous sommes conscients qu'ils sont trop nombreux à ne pas se sentir en sécurité. We're just coming out of a pandemic after 3 years of anxiety and isolation. And at the same time, I know, and I think all of us know, that there is a feeling that crime has worked its way into places we all thought were safe. On the subway going to work, or walking down the street during the day, or grabbing a coffee. Pour les courageux membres des forces policières, aller au travail semble plus dangereux que par le passé. Un lourd poids qu'ils doivent porter, ainsi que leurs familles. Le Canada est un pays sécuritaire et je crois que nous mesurons tous la chance que nous avons d'y vivre. Le nombre de crimes est plus bas aujourd'hui qu'il y a 20 ans. Mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'on ne peut pas faire mieux. You expect us to tackle crime, and you expect us to tackle the causes of crime. You want our laws to be effective in maintaining public safety, while staying true to the values enshrined in the Charter of Rights. You want us to work with all levels of government to ensure that your communities are safe and our justice system is working the way it should. That makes perfect sense. Administration of justice is a shared responsibility with the provinces and territories. Nous avons été clairs avec vous. Notre gouvernement allait faire sa part sur la manière dont le système de justice traite les récidivistes violents. Ça veut dire une réforme de la loi, mais pas seulement, ce qui explique le fait de nombreuses personnes qui m'entourent en ce moment. Je vais commencer par la réforme judiciaire. Plus tôt ce matin, j'ai présenté le projet de loi C-48. C-48 fait des changements précis dans les articles sur la mise en liberté sous caution du Code criminel qui visent les récidivistes violents. Nous voulons aussi endiguer la violence armée et améliorer la réponse du système de justice pour les personnes victimes de violences entre partenaires intimes. This bill responds directly to concerns raised by the premiers as well as police, mayors, and victims' advocates. It flows from the work that we have been doing together with the provinces and territories for several months now, highlighted by our most recent meeting in March, where I committed to bring legislation forward to reform the bail system. We also had the benefit of work that was done by the Justice Committee, and both Chair Sarai and Parliamentary Secretary Ananda Sangri were part of that. The work has been refreshingly nonpartisan, with officials and politicians focused on solutions to improve public safety. That's exactly what you would expect of us. So what's in C-48? This legislation amends the criminal code to do several things. First, it creates a new reverse onus targeting repeat violent offenders involving weapons. Weapons including firearms, including knives, and including bear spray. Second, it adds specific firearms offenses to an existing reverse onus provision, and these are often offenses linked to organized crime. Third, it strengthens the existing reverse onus regime addressing intimate partner violence, which we first introduced in former Bill C-75. And finally, it requires courts to consider an accused person's history of convictions for violence, as well as community safety and security concerns when making a bail decision. Crucially, these proposed reforms signal that repeat violent offenders who pose a risk to community safety should not be released while awaiting trial. The goal of Bill C-48 is improving public safety. At the same time, we want to make sure that these law reforms do not make things worse for Indigenous people, Black people, and other vulnerable groups who we know are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. This was recognized in the communique following our FPT meeting in March, and I know this is a priority that my provincial and territorial counterparts share. I want to re-emphasize the important role that the provinces and territories have played here. Several provinces have already taken steps to address the bail system within their jurisdictions. Ontario has invested $112 million to help ensure that repeat violent offenders comply with their bail conditions. Manitoba has increased support for its criminal organization high-risk offender unit, including funds for a full-time psychologist, additional probation officers, and community corrections workers. Saskatchewan has released an updated provincial bail policy that provincial Crown prosecutors must follow in cases involving high-risk offenses and intimate partner violence, as well as cases involving children and vulnerable adults. And British Columbia, a leader in this regard, has the provincial government introducing a revised bail policy that directs Crown prosecutors to seek detention in cases involving repeat violent offenders. This is exactly how our federation is supposed to work. Each order of government doing its part, working together to ensure that you are safe in your communities. Le crime est un enjeu incroyablement complexe. Il faut en être conscient. Ces réformes ne sont qu'une partie des efforts déployés pour un système de justice efficace qui réponde aux besoins des Canadiens. Nous comprenons que le meilleur moyen de protéger nos communautés, c'est de prévenir le crime, ce qui signifie s'attaquer aux causes profondes du crime. Concrètement, il faut comprendre pourquoi une personne commet un crime et trouver des manières de la faire dévier de cette trajectoire. I'm proud to support investments that make our justice system better equipped to get people the help they need to leave the criminal justice system and never need to come back. We've seen success with drug treatment courts, community justice centers, and the Indigenous Justice Program, and more. We'll hear more from my colleagues about critical investments in crime prevention and anti-gun and gang prevention. And we're working to ensure that people get access to the mental health and addiction supports that they need. Strong laws, crime prevention, supports for vulnerable people. These are the three pillars of good criminal justice policy. Together, they help make our communities safer. C-48 is one part of that commitment to your safety. It delivers on the promise I made to my provincial and territorial counterparts to reform our bail laws. It's informed by what we heard from premiers, from ministers, from mayors, from police, and from Parliament. It's important to see this bill make its way through Parliament quickly. I firmly hope this bill will receive unanimous consent. Canadians expect us to act, and I trust my friends in the House and Senate view things in exactly the same way. Thank you. Merci. I would now invite Minister Mendicino to say a few words.
Merci, David. Thank you as well for the Indigenous land acknowledgement, and welcome to all of our colleagues. Today's announcement is about keeping our communities safe. The bail reform legislation we've just tabled in the House of Commons zeroes in on repeat violent offenders who use guns and other weapons. With this proposed law, the onus will now be on them to justify to a court why they shouldn't remain in custody as they wait for a trial. In preparing this legislation, as you've heard Minister Lametti explain, we engaged with provincial, territorial, and municipal partners, as well as police leaders and community advocates. And within our own government, we have worked very closely with our colleagues right across the benches, including, and I'd like to single out Minister Bennett, who does extraordinary work in advancing our mental health strategy, and that cuts right to the core of the way in which we can stop crime and loss and tragedy before it occurs. And I look forward to ongoing collaboration with you, Carolyn. Bill C-48 reflects the broad consensus that we heard. We must strengthen our bail system to keep communities safer. For workers riding a bus or a subway, for parents who send their kids to school, for families who are going for a walk in their own neighborhood. This legislation is about them and indeed all Canadians so that we can keep them safe. And it will help to separate those offenders from the community to achieve that goal. Bill C-48 is one part of our comprehensive strategy to tackle gun crime and keep Canadians safe. Our plan is based on three priorities: strong laws, strong borders, and strong prevention. On strong laws, in addition to today's bail reform legislation, we are taking major steps forward through Bill C-21. 3 years ago, this government banned assault-style firearms like the AR-15, which were designed for a battlefield and have no place in our communities. We're now taking steps to strengthen that national ban, as recommended by the Mass Casualty Commission out of Nova Scotia. And just about a year ago, we banned the sale, purchase, and transfer of handguns, which have become the #1 type of gun used in homicides. These are two key elements of Bill C-21, Canada's most significant gun control legislation in a generation. The legislation will also raise maximum sentences against gun traffickers and introduce red and yellow flag laws to address the relationship between domestic abuse and gun violence, which disproportionately impacts women and young girls. As we speak, Bill C-21 is being debated in the House, and we're making good progress with the support of the NDP and the Bloc Québécois. On strong borders and enforcement, we've invested almost $500 million into the Canada Border Services Agency in the last 2 years alone. We've also deepened our cooperation with the United States to fight gun smuggling and trafficking. And just last week, we announced nearly $400 million federal dollars to give police the additional resources they need in the fight against gun and gang violence. And I would be remiss if I did not again extend our condolences to OPP Officer Mueller, the latest member of the policing community to be killed in the line of duty. Finally, our plan also includes strong prevention strategies. And this is headlined by the $250 million Building Safer Communities Fund, which helps young people make good choices and to stop gun crime before it starts. And our plan is beginning to work. StatsCan reports that gun crime is trending downwards, including in Toronto, which marked a 22% decrease between the years 2020 and 2021. But we can't stop there. L'annonce d'aujourd'hui est l'un des éléments du plan global de notre gouvernement pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. Cela commence par des frontières solides et un soutien à la police avec des ressources supplémentaires, une coopération renforcée avec les États-Unis pour lutter contre la contrebande et pas plus tard que la semaine dernière, comme j'avais déjà mentionné, l'annonce de près de 400 millions de dollars pour lutter contre la violence. Ensuite, il s'agit de la loi forte, comme les réformes d'aujourd'hui, l'interdiction des armes d'assaut, le gel national des armes de poing et le projet de loi C-21, l'action la plus importante du Canada en matière de contrôle des armes à feu depuis une génération. Enfin, Elle implique des stratégies de prévention solides pour arrêter les crimes commis à l'aide d'armes à feu avant qu'ils ne commencent. And that is exactly what we will continue to do, is to advance a plan that focuses on strong laws, strong borders, and strong prevention. When it comes to keeping Canadians safe, you can't pick and choose one of these priorities. You have to advance all three. And by advancing this legislation today around bail reform and in companionship with the other steps that we are taking through Bill C-21, the investments we are making to support law enforcement in our communities and our borders, and perhaps most importantly, to continue to advance strategies which go right to the root causes of gun crime, we can stop tragedy and loss which is caused by violent offenses and other gun crimes before they even start. And with that, I will now turn it back over to our moderator for the next speaker. Merci.
Thank you, ministers. Yeah, so we'll do one question, one follow-up. We'll start with reporters in the room. If you want to ask a question, just
I believe Minister LeBlanc has remarks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
JP, you were about to miss the best part of this news conference.
How could I cut you off?
Unbelievable. Your colleagues, the look of dread on their faces when you were about to miss les choses extraordinaires que je vais ajouter brièvement. Comme mes collègues ont dit, over the last number of months, we have been working extremely closely with our provincial and territorial counterparts to develop this legislation. This morning, for example, I had an opportunity to speak with Premier Ford to acknowledge the important work that he did and his ministers did, and other provinces and territories as well, of course, in contributing to this important legislation. It responds directly to the concerns that provinces have raised with respect to their ability to hold violent repeat offenders to account. Through these amendments to the Criminal Code of Canada, we're creating additional safeguards which will make it harder for individuals with extensive criminal histories, particularly when it comes to violence with weapons and intimate partner violence, to be released while they await trial. Grâce à ces modifications législatives, les victimes de crimes violents et tous les Canadiens seront plus en sécurité. C'est une approche équilibrée qui respecte des droits fondamentaux énoncés dans la Charte des droits et libertés, tout en étant robuste et dissuasive. Cela s'additionne aux restrictions sur les armes à feu que nous avons mis en place au cours des dernières années, en plus des programmes de prévention que mes collègues ont décrits, que nous finançons à travers le pays afin de s'attaquer à la source même de la criminalité. Pendant ce temps-là, les conservateurs n'offrent aucune solution concrète en matière de sécurité publique. Conservatives have no real plan to tackle violent crime. They're happy to mouth empty slogans and tout failed policies. Canadians need real solutions, and this legislation tabled today is a key part of our government's plan to keep Canadians safe. Ce projet de loi va rendre nos communautés, nos collectivités plus sécuritaires. Nous espérons qu'il bénéficierait, comme le ministre Lametti a bien dit, de l'appui de tous les partis à la Chambre des communes. As this bill makes its way through Parliament, we'll continue to listen to our territorial and provincial partners, to law enforcement agencies, community groups, on what more we can all continue to do together to keep Canadians safe. Et maintenant, JP, avec ces mots tellement importants, je pense que vous allez passer aux questions.
Thank you, Minister. Okay, so as I was saying, one question, one follow-up, just lock eyes with me, and I will write your name down, and we'll get to all of you, hopefully, in the room. And then if we do have time left, we will go to Zoom. So the folks who are on the meeting there, just raise your hand, use the raise hand function, and we'll try and get to you. Tom Perry, CBC News, go ahead.
Hi, Minister Lametti. Can I ask you, why did you cut it off at violent crime with a weapon? We heard from Pierre Poilievre, who's saying that really any violent repeat offenders should be denied bail outright. So why did you think that a weapon was sort of a valid cutoff point?
Well, first of all, we as a piece of legislation, we responded to what the Premier's asked for, which was reverse onus in Section 95 and increased investments in things like guns and gangs. And we went further by adding another reverse onus, the one you've referred to with respect to violent repeat offenders. We've added the community consideration. And in there, we have also directed judges or justices of the peace to look at an offender's violent record as a matter of course. So even though it's not in the reverse onus provision, it is in the general directives that we've added to this piece of legislation. So we've included violent offenders generally. What we are doing, Tom, is signaling to courts, we're signaling to Crown prosecutors that a person should not be out on bail if they have a history of violence. And so that's precisely what we're doing. We think we have chosen a way that is charter compliant, and it certainly goes beyond what the Premier has asked us to do in their letter to the Prime Minister.
I actually had a question on a different topic for Minister Mendicino. I'm just wondering if there's any update in terms of, have you got any update on why information about foreign interference didn't make it to Cabinet, and if there's any update on how many members of Parliament you've informed or spoken to about potential foreign interference?
I'll come to that in just a second, but I just want to add very quickly to what David said, that Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives often come at Canadians with catchy slogans. What we've done today is add to a concrete plan to reduce gun crime and violence. And it is one thing to talk tough against criminals, but what we've done is, in addition to tabling this legislation, last week we introduced $390 million more for law enforcement. This comes in the wake of what has been a very difficult period for the policing family. I have been to every single one of the funerals of fallen police officers in the line of duty, which shows that in a very tangible and concrete way, we're doing what we need to keep our community safe and also to support law enforcement. So I think it's just important to make sure that the record is clear about that. Secondly, as you've heard us say repeatedly, that any form of foreign interference is unacceptable, I beg your pardon. And I want to be clear that when it comes to parliamentarians, we take that issue extremely seriously, which is why when Mr. Chong's issue came to light, we reached out to him, we provided him with a briefing, and we'll continue to support him and all parliamentarians so that they can represent their communities in a way that is free and clear from foreign interference. And finally, I would just say that you heard the Prime Minister say, and I will be supporting him in this regard, as will Minister LeBlanc in his capacity of Minister of Democratic Institutions, that if there are any instances where foreign interference in parliamentarians are surfacing, that we need to be informed directly. That is the Minister of Public Safety in my capacity, as well as the Prime Minister.
Number of MPs? Have you contacted other MPs? Can you say who they are, how many you've contacted?
Look, we get that question often from the press. I am not in a position to talk about individual cases because of the Security of Information Act. It's important that we safeguard their safety and safeguard the individuals that work within the security and intelligence community. And that's not to say that there aren't public documents that explain the work that CSIS is doing. For example, the annual report, which they tabled just a couple of weeks ago, which shows very clearly that we are engaging federal parliamentarians to ensure that we are providing them with support around foreign interference. This is an issue that is evolving. It's complex. It's not easy. And that's why we need to work very closely with our colleagues in the House of Commons, regardless of partisanship, to be sure that we can protect them from foreign interference so that they can represent their constituencies.
Okay. Taria Isri from Global News, please.
This is for Minister Lametti. Are today's reforms an admission of sorts that we did have a catch and release problem, as the Conservatives have criticized your government for having when it came to violent offenders?
Not at all. We are strengthening the bail regime that is there, but we hadn't weakened it prior to. We strengthened the bail regime with Bill C-75 by adding a reverse onus for intimate partner violence, which we further strengthened, by the way, in this piece of legislation. What we're doing is sending a clear signal with other reverse onuses, as well as a general message, as well as, and this is important, an obligation to consider the community. We had a very high-profile case in the north, in the Vuntut-Gwich'in First Nation, in which the community didn't want somebody on bail to come back because they were afraid. So we're asking justices and JPs to take the community into account in their decision-making. So we're sending out a strong message, but Canada has a fundamentally strong bail system, and it is a charter right. You are innocent until proven guilty. This is a critically important part of our legal system. But what we're doing for certain violent offenses is changing the default position and making sure that it is only in cases where there isn't a threat to public security that they will get bail.
And criminal defense lawyers have said keeping people in jails will just increase the likelihood that they'll reoffend. So why are you confident that these reforms will actually increase public safety?
Well, these are targeted reforms. I think there's a valid point that is being made by criminal defense lawyers. 70% of people in federal prisons are awaiting trial. That's the majority. They are technically innocent at that point. Legally innocent at that point. They may be found to be legally guilty later. And so we need to strike a balance. We think we've done that here, working in the range between the charter right to bail and public security and public safety. We think we've threaded that needle. And we've done it with the help of the provinces and territories by working together.
Okay, Valérie Michaela Bain, Radio-Canada.
Monsieur Lametti, dites-moi, je vais jouer l'avocat du diable, étant donné qu'on n'a pas les données sur le nombre de gens qui ont réussi à obtenir une libération conditionnelle alors qu'ils avaient commis un crime violent et qu'on ne sait pas combien de personnes ça pourrait toucher si le projet de loi devient loi, comment êtes-vous certain, quelle assurance est-ce que vous avez que ça va fonctionner, que ce sera efficace et pourquoi vous en tenir à 5 ans et pas le dossier criminel dans l'ensemble de quelqu'un qui a commis des crimes violents armés?
Pour répondre à la question précise au début, comme j'ai dit, il y a un équilibre. Et donc, on a mis 5 ans pour ne pas aller trop loin, justement parce qu'on ne veut pas engorger le système avec des questions de libération, les déterminations de libération sous caution. Globalement, on a un équilibre. Et c'est vrai qu'on doit travailler sur les données. Effectivement, on a eu un engagement des provinces, justement, de fournir et partager les données. Et Statistique Canada a commencé à travailler là-dessus. Et j'espère donc d'avoir des meilleures données dans une proche avenir. C'est très important. Et avec l'engagement de toutes les provinces et territoires, je crois qu'on pourrait y arriver. Mais peut-être la vraie réponse à votre question, c'est justement la coopération qu'on a entre les provinces, les territoires et nous, le fédéral, les forces policières. Nous allons tous dans la même direction et en travaillant ensemble, on peut aborder une question si complexe comme la libération sous caution avec succès. C'est la seule façon d'agir. On assure, je crois, le bon chemin et c'est peut-être la chose qui me donne la plus confiance.
Peut-être pour Mme Bennett, je ne sais pas si vous répondez en anglais ou en français. On a parlé de prévention. De quelle façon est-ce que vous allez vous assurer ou tenter de vous assurer que ces crimes violents-là ne se répètent pas?
Merci pour la question. Et comme mon collègue a dit, c'est la prévention et vraiment d'avoir les meilleurs services de santé mentale pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes. C'est dans les maladies mentales complexes, dans l'année 2017, nous avons investi 5 milliards de dollars, les 6 priorités des provinces et territoires pour les maladies mentales complexes. Et maintenant, nous avons un projet pilote de St. Thomas avec le logement, avec les services sociaux et de santé mentale et l'usage de substances pour enlever les 20 personnes avec tous les relations avec les policiers et aussi dans les salles d'urgence. C'est très important d'avoir les logements supportifs avec, oui, d'avoir pour protéger leurs médicaments. C'est très important pour nous de Kelowna, Penticton, les maires ont dit la même chose. C'est les mêmes 20% et d'avoir le support, l'appui pour les personnes avec les maladies mentales sérieuses.
Si je peux ajouter quelque chose très rapidement, dans mon portefeuille, il y a l'initiative fédérale de la création de communautés plus en sécurité, le Building Safer Communities Fund. C'est un fonds de 250 millions de dollars. On a accéléré l'implémentation de ce programme, y inclure au Québec, où le dernier été, j'avais annoncé environ 40 millions de dollars avec mon collègue, l'honorable Pablo Rodriguez, donc en collaboration avec les provinces et aussi les municipalités. On peut renforcer la capacité des organismes locaux pour offrir plus de services santé mentale, comme Carolyn a expliqué. Mais au-delà de mon portefeuille, il y a une approche de prévention avec une stratégie. Non, il y a une stratégie nationale pour la santé mentale. Et ça, c'est la façon qu'on peut avancer un des trois piliers que j'avais mentionnés, des lois fortes, des frontières fortes, et oui, une stratégie de prévention qui est vraiment forte.
Okay, Jordan Gowling, CTV.
Hi, this is for Minister Lametti. You deny that Bill C-75 went too far in its efforts to streamline the bail system, but these reforms you're announcing today are a direct result of criticisms by police associations, municipalities, and provinces. So how do you square that today? Was Bill C-75 just perfect legislation?
Bill C-75 was an important step forward in criminal law reform in Canada, of which bail was just a small part. It was the product of extensive negotiations with the provinces and input from the provinces in the period running up to that. Bill 75, in terms of bail, strengthened the bail regime by adding a reverse onus with respect to intimate partner violence, but it didn't change the fundamentals of Canadian bail law. The fundamentals were already there in a series of Supreme Court decisions that remained the same before and after C-75. So it didn't really do that. It did render more flexible non-serious, non-violent offenses, and asked judges not to create a revolving door with respect to administration of justice offenses, which aren't violent. So with respect to violent crime, Bill C-75 strengthened the bail regime and was consistent with Supreme Court decisions. What we're doing here is we're now going a little bit further.
And just as a result of these reforms today, are you anticipating any capacity issues in jails now that we'll be holding more violent offenders? And have you had any conversations with your provincial counterparts on that front?
We haven't with respect to capacity, although it was something that we discussed with respect to finding the right balance today. It certainly was a discussion that we had at our federal, provincial, territorial meeting in terms of not going too far with what we were doing. We'll continue to monitor. This is a complex problem, complex challenge. The only way we will get through it is by working together. Remember, the provinces have the administration of justice as part of their responsibilities. We set rules in the criminal code and certain other statutes. So we'll need to work together with them and see if there are pressure points on the system as we move forward. I can add that we have added a 5-year review in this piece of legislation precisely to do that.
Okay, Fraser Needham from APTN, please.
Thanks. This is for Minister Lametti. Do you anticipate the changes that you've announced today will affect in any way how glad you factors are applied at bail hearings?
It should not, in the sense that Gladue factors are applied at bail hearings, but it does not change the fundamental premise of bail, which is you have a right to bail unless you are a threat to flee, unless you're a threat to public safety, or if the administration if the confidence of the justice system will be brought into question. So those always have been the predominant factors. The Gladue factors then ask you to take that into account with respect to the individual. That's still going to be the case here. So we're going to work within the framework, and the Gladue factors will still apply.
Okay, as a follow-up for both Minister Lametti and Minister Mendicino, we've heard a lot of stats thrown around about increase in violent crime. I think Leader of the Opposition was just out saying it's increased 32%. I don't know what the time frame was, and that this is largely due to violent offenders out on bail. Do your stats bail that out, or in what you've been able to come, is that really a problem that violent crime is on the increase across the country and that it is due to repeat offenders out on bail?
I frankly don't know where the Leader of the Opposition gets his statistics, so I won't comment on them. What I will say is that violent crime has gone down over the past 20 years. We do know that from Statistics Canada, and Stats Canada has also told us that, as Minister Mendicino pointed out in his prepared remarks, that gun crime is going down. What we do know is that there have been a number of high-profile incidents, and that there's a feeling of insecurity out there, and we are addressing that by sending a clear message about bail and about the principles surrounding bail.
Yeah, I would just add to that again, contrary to the rhetorical spin that you get out of Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives, when you actually look at their record, it did great harm to public safety. Many of their laws around sentencing were struck down by the Supreme Court of Canada. They presided over a number of years. The last time they held the reins of government, the Conservative government did, they made dramatic cuts, which had a devastating impact to police budgets. And they continue to stigmatize people who are vulnerable. I mean, Minister Bennett has rightfully called out Mr. Poilievre when he has, with a broad stroke, marginalized individuals who need a public health approach when it comes to prevention. Conversely, our government has put forward laws which are informed by a broad consensus, including Bill C-48 today. We did that work in conjunction with provincial and territorial governments, regardless of partisan stripe. And we are putting in place additional resources to support policing in our communities. And finally, we have rolled out an innovative Building Safer Communities Fund, which looks at the social determinants that can lead to crime in our communities, including making sure that individuals who are vulnerable because they have a mental health issue or maybe struggling with substance, that they get the treatment that they need. And what this bail reform legislation does is it gets that entire exercise right by focusing on repeat violent offenders who need to be detained in custody pending their trial, while at the same time respecting the Charter. And that is the North Star of this government when it comes to passing legislation and keeping our communities safe.
Mylène Crête, La Presse, please.
Bonjour, ma question est pour Monsieur Lametti. On sait que les gens qui entrent dans les critères là, de ce nouveau renversement de la preuve, la plupart du temps, les juges ne leur accordent pas de liberté sous caution. Donc, pourquoi faire des modifications qui risquent d'avoir en bout de piste peu d'impact puisque les juges le font déjà?
Il y a évidemment les règlements qu'on vient de changer et donc on change le fardeau qui est un élément très important du processus. Et donc, en soi, les changements qu'on vient d'apporter sont très importants. Mais il faut aussi, Mylène, penser au signal qu'on est en train d'envoyer aux juges, aux couronnes et aux avocats à travers le Canada et à la société en général, qu'on veut que ces questions, que ces analyses soient abordées à chaque fois qu'un juge prend une décision sur libération sous caution. Donc, c'est aussi une façon d'encadrer l'analyse qui est très important. Et donc, on veut en faisant tout ça, envoyer un message clair à la société.
Et vous avez mentionné plusieurs provinces là, qui avaient investi de l'argent là, pour justement s'assurer que les gens respectent leurs conditions de libération. Est-ce que vous trouvez que le Québec en fait assez sur ce front-là?
On va travailler avec le Québec. Le ministre Bonnardel a participé dans la réunion qu'on a eue au mois de mars. Et il faisait partie de l'unanimité dans le communiqué qu'on a publié après. Et on est prêt à travailler avec le Québec, évidemment, comme on est prêt à travailler avec n'importe quelle province et territoire pour surveiller le système. Comme j'ai dit en anglais, le droit pénal et le système pénal ne se réduit pas dans un seul slogan, comme les conservateurs sont en train de faire, en tout temps. C'est un slogan pour eux autres. Pour nous, c'est un défi complexe où il faut travailler avec les experts, avec les provinces, avec les territoires, avec les forces policières, avec les victimes, avec tout le monde qui sont des parties prenantes dans le système. Ce n'est pas un slogan. Et c'est le travail qu'on est en train de faire et on le fait en bonne foi et acharnement.
Je sais que vous êtes prêt à travailler avec le Québec, mais ma question, est-ce que vous trouvez que le Québec en fait assez?
Je ne vais pas, évidemment, donner des commentaires sur les mesures qui sont déjà là. C'est pour le Québec de déterminer comment ils pourraient faire leur partie du boulot. Et je suis prêt, on est prêt, comme gouvernement, à travailler avec le Québec, justement, pour qu'il puisse réussir.
David Fraser, the Canadian Press.
Hi there. Officials this morning were unable to tell us how many people these targeted reforms would impact. So I'm wondering, what level of confidence do you have that these changes won't disproportionately affect groups of people who are already overrepresented in our prisons? Thank you.
That's a good question, David. I've already commented about statistics and getting better statistics, and we do have, I had said this in French, but we do have the engagement on the part of the provinces to accumulate and share their statistics, and we know that Statistics Canada is also doing that as well. So we do hope to have a better statistical picture moving forward. We hope that we have threaded the needle with respect to not going too far in terms of either clogging up the bail system or having a disproportionate impact on groups that are already overrepresented in the criminal justice system generally. We've tried to do that by remaining targeted and focused, so focusing on violent crime with weapons and other specific infractions, as well as intimate partner violence. So we're hoping that by keeping it in that box, we won't have a disproportionate impact. We will obviously monitor this. All the provincial and territorial ministers of justice and public safety ministers agreed that we don't want to exacerbate over-incarceration of Indigenous people, of Black people, other marginalized Canadians in the criminal justice system, and we will be vigilant.
The other thing I'm wondering about is there's a election in Alberta. I'm wondering, how was this communicated to the Alberta government? Because I know the justice minister there was one of the more active and vocal people when you met a few months ago.
And indeed, he took the podium with us at the final press conference when we announced that joint communique. So then, I guess they're in an election, so he's not technically I guess he is still technically the Minister Shandro at the time, was supportive. We have worked before that time, since the month of October, we have been working with the provinces. It was first raised at a federal, provincial, territorial meeting by the British Columbia government, an NDP government. We have worked since that time at a technical level with all governments across Canada of every political stripe. After the March meeting, we also continued to work with the provinces going back and forth and territories with respect to the kinds of things that we were proposing. So we've had a good deal of interaction on this, including Alberta, and we hope that this will find favor not only with the provinces and territories, but as I said, with every single political party in the House of Commons.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, for today. These folks have to get back to the House. Thank you, ministers, MPs, for joining us for this press conference. Thank you all for your questions. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, JP.